One of the most common mistakes I see among new programmers is to overuse the dry principle. The dry principle means don't repeat yourself, and it's something that is often told to new programmers as a way to write more readable and more maintainable code. And by overusing this, they often get the opposite effect, where their code is harder to read and it's harder to maintain and expand upon. I'm going to make a small sample app to illustrate when you should or should not use the dry principle. It's not a hard and fast rule, as it's very subjective on when you should use it and when you shouldn't, but I hope that this illustration will show you some ideas of when it applies and when it doesn't. So the app we're going to make is a little marketplace where you can list items for sale, like a dog or an old car, and people can buy them. Now this view is represented by this template. We've got two divs, a paragraph tag for the name, an image, and another paragraph tag for the price. We have one for an object we're calling animal and one for an object we're calling car. And if you're not familiar with Ruby or Rails, this angle bracket %equal operator is just a way to put a value from your Ruby code into the template, and it functions very similarly to other programming languages. We basically have a template here, and we have some data, and we're putting that data in the template. Now looking at this view, you can already start to see the patterns here. They both are wrapped in a div. They both have two paragraph tags and an image. And the objects all use the same properties. They have a name, an image, and a price property. Now your first view, and something that I would do as a new developer, is I would see these two divs and say, aha, I see some duplication. I see some things that can be abstracted into something else. And abstracting things is fun, and it's kind of like a puzzle that's rewarding to figure out how can I make these two things alike. And so what you might be tempted to do is to take this view and replace it with this one. We create a shared view and we pass in a generic object so we can remove the duplication of those two divs. So by making the shared view, we can change our template from the two divs on the left to just rendering our shared view and passing in the two objects, the animal and the car. And at this moment in time, this seems like a good abstraction. It seems like we have reduced duplication, and we've now made it simpler to build this view and to reuse this code. Now, what might happen next in our sample app is we might need more information for our two objects. So they might request wanting to know the breed of a dog and the make and model of a car. Now with our current structure, we might say that an animal has a breed and a car has a make and model. Now those two fields are not the same anymore, but we might come up with some type of abstraction like this, where we create this new classification property and we use the fields we have, we abstract this new interface called classification. So if you're not familiar with Ruby, we've basically made a method in our animal class called classification, and we're returning the breed property. For the car, we're also making the same property, classification, and we're string interpolating the make and the model. So we want this string to say something like Honda Pilot or Nissan Rogue. Using this new property, we can add this new field into our view, and everything seems to work. Our abstraction holds up, and we continue to use this shared view. Now, what will eventually happen is we will find a way that these objects do not match, and that's where we run into problems. So, for example, what if people wanted to know how many miles are on the car that they're buying? That's a very reasonable request. You would want to know how many miles the car had before you buy it. Now, this is where we run into problems, because there's no equivalent field or structure for an animal. So we could try and reach for things like checking the class of our object. And this is generally considered what is called a code smell, meaning that it may not be wrong, but it probably hints at something that is wrong in the underlying structure. So this would work. We could use an if statement to check if the object is a car class, and we could render that field if so. But what we've done here is we've continued to force our way down this abstraction, and we're beginning to see that our abstraction actually wasn't quite right. There was information we didn't have in the past that now makes this very clunky, and continuing to extend and build upon this is going to lead us into more and more situations like this. Now, what we could have done, and what would have been totally okay, although it is harder to keep yourself in this mindset while you're building it, would be to just have two separate divs. To have those fields that for a while were duplicated, but give us the flexibility to add in the breed, to add in the make and model, and to add in the miles. This ultimately would have been a better solution. And there's two quotes I want to insert here about when we apply the drive principle too liberally or incorrectly. And one of them is, duplication is far cheaper than the wrong abstraction. Second one, premature optimization is the root of all evil. We've applied the drive principle too often, and what we've created is the wrong abstraction, and that will lead to technical debt and trouble in the code base as we either undo this or we continue to try and work in and around it. Now, if we go back to the original definition of the drive principle, which came from a book called The Pragmatic Programmer by Dave Thomas, he says that many people took the drive principle to refer to code only. They thought that dry means don't copy and paste lines of code. Dry is about duplication of knowledge, of intent. It's about expressing the same thing in two different places, possibly in two different ways. So we've seen a way in which using the dry principle was not the right choice. Now let's look at a way where it does make sense. Let's imagine that in our app we have a checkout page when you're purchasing your thing. We have the price of the thing, and then we also, as a platform, take a processing fee. So the dog may cost $100, but the platform is going to add a $2 fee, and your total will be $102 for the user. Now, one way we might represent this in code is by having a processing fee method and a total price method mapping to those two fields. For the processing fee, we take in a parameter which is the price of the item, and then we have a marketplace fee of 2%. And to find the processing fee, we multiply the price by the marketplace fee. The total price, in a similar way, we take the item price passed in as a parameter, we take a marketplace fee again of 2%, and the item price times 1 plus the marketplace fee gives us the total price. Now looking at this, we also see duplication, but the difference here is that we're actually duplicating not just code, but an idea here. There's a duplicated idea of a marketplace fee of 2%. So we can see that these two lines are duplicated in both functions. And this would be a place where it is correct to apply the dry principle, because we have created this idea in two different places in our code. So if, for example, the fee was to change, we would now have to remember to change it in two places. Or if we had other logic, for example, if we take a smaller fee when the price of the item is higher, so we might take a smaller fee on a car sale, but we might take a larger fee on a smaller price item like an animal sale, that would require us to change and maintain that logic in two places. So this fee is not only duplicated, but there's also a little bit of logic duplication here, and that is this idea of finding the fee for the item price. So a proper use of the dry principle here would be to only keep track of this marketplace fee in one spot, as well as reuse this code when we're calculating the total price by calling the function that finds the processing fee. We now have one place in our code where we are keeping track of what the fee is, and one place where we are calculating that fee. So if we did have that extra logic about what the fee should be or when it should or should not be applied, it would only be found in one place. I hope this helps explain the dry principle and when you should and should not use it. It is again subjective and is something that as a new developer you will probably do the wrong thing more times than not, but it is something that you will gain experience in, and you will get a better feel for when you should remove duplication and when you shouldn't. As a general rule, it is easier to abstract later than it is to reverse a bad abstraction. So if you are unsure about it, go on the side of leaving duplication in your code, leaving it unabstracted, because it is always easier to abstract it later. Thanks for watching and happy programming.